We have hit 1 o'clock, so let's get started. Kia ora koutou, my name is Sylvie Thrushmarsh. I'm the Chief Evangelist for MyHR. Many of you will have seen and heard from me before, so welcome along. Thank you for joining us again. For those of you who haven't come to a MyHR webinar before or who haven't been to one in a while, welcome also. Thank you for making the time. Today's session is going to be on HR fundamentals, and we're focusing on running seamless performance reviews. Performance reviews can sometimes get a bit of a bad rap. They're often pretty process heavy. HR people, like myself, like to make them quite complicated sometimes. So the focus of today's session really is about equipping you with the tools to think strategically and tactically around how you do run effective performance conversations in your organization or your business. We're going to be working to about 50 minutes today, so I've got about 35 or 40 minutes of content. I've got a short demo of MyHR's updated performance review feature to show you so that we can talk through how we can bring some of this into practice. And then, of course, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so we're hoping to get you out of here at about 1:50 today. So let's start clicking through and getting started. Now, before we kick off, a little bit about who MyHR is and why we're running a webinar on performance reviews. So we're a business established in 2013. Our headquarters are in Auckland and Tamaki Makaurau in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And the purpose of MyHR really is to make HR easy. We're an outsourced HR provider covering all employment matters. So everything from performance reviews, like we're talking about today, through to onboarding and employment agreements and documents, through to the pointy end of HR, so employment relations, disciplinaries, restructures, probation period and trial period terminations. We cover all of the full range of HR support that small and medium-sized organizations need. The way that we do this is we combine a couple of things that you don't see combined a lot in our industry. So we have expert HR support, so HR practitioners like myself who've either done degrees or are industry qualified and have spent a long time working in the HR field with smart HR software. So the MyHR platform is your one source of truth for HR in your business, for your people records, your policies, your documentation, your processes like performance reviews. And that platform acts as the bridge between your business and your managers and us on the HR end, which means that we can service business of all sizes and shapes in a way that we couldn't if we were just consultants having to charge, $300 an hour for our time. What we have been able to build over the last 10 years, which we're very proud of, is that we support more than 1,300 New Zealand and Australian employers. And we've just launched in Canada as well, with a full launch happening in Q2 of next year. So watch this space for being operational in Canada, which is very exciting. In terms of who we support, we've got businesses of all shapes and sizes. So we've got our smallest employer has one employee. They're very keen. They like crossing their T's and dotting their I's. And our largest now has 1,100 staff all across the motu, from up in Kerikeri in the north down to Dunedin in the south. So all industries, all regions, we've got businesses we support in all of those spaces, which as an HR practitioner is very exciting because you get to deal with a range of people and problems that you don't always get to touch when you're a consultant or when you're working in-house. Finally, we're very cost effective. It's about $21 per person per month in terms of MyHR support, but that varies a little bit depending on how big you are. And we don't have any lock-in contracts. So the onus is very much on us to provide a really excellent service. If you don't like it, that's unfortunate. You're welcome to leave. But our growth and our retention rate over 10 years suggests that for the most part, we deliver a really excellent service and people really value the work that we do together. So moving into today's session, just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin, as always. Your questions are very, very welcome and they're very encouraged. These sessions tend to come alive when there's a fair bit of audience participation. Otherwise, it's just me talking to a screen for an hour, which isn't what anyone would choose to do on a Wednesday afternoon. So if you have questions, you're welcome to pop them in the Q&A function, probably down the bottom of your screen as we go through. If there are questions that I see come up that make sense to answer in the moment, then I might do that. But typically what I tend to do is I'll be seeing your questions come through and I'll answer them all together at the end so that we're not potentially disrupting the flow of the session or getting in the way of a topic that we might touch on later. But questions are very welcome. If you'd like to ask a question anonymously, you're welcome to do that. If you're happy to put your name to it, that's awesome. Just make sure you don't use any identifying details or sensitive information. And if I see a question come through that maybe looks a bit sensitive, I might try and scrub it just to make sure it's appropriate for everyone to see. Lastly, the webinar recording will be available after this session if you'd like to come back and watch it. So if you need to duck away and take a call, if you have to leave early for whatever reason, totally cool. I'm not going to call you out and shame you on the webinar. But if you do want to come back and watch the session later, you will be able to. You'll get an email probably by the end of the week with a link to the session. Likewise, if there's someone you know who you think could benefit from watching it, again, you're very welcome to forward it on to them and they're welcome to take a look. Last note, what this does mean is if you do ask a question, of course, it will be captured in this public recording. So if there's something that you wouldn't want to be to exist on the record, as it were, do make sure you ask it anonymously, and that way you can get the answer you want without potentially having this be in a space that you wouldn't want it to be in. So before we get started, it's a big breathless intro from me. I'm very excited today. What I'm keen to hear from a couple of you is what it is that you're looking to learn today. I've obviously got kind of a pre-prepared kōrero that I'm going to go through in terms of the topics I'm going to touch on. But if I know what's brought you along to the session today, I can be a bit more particular or a bit thoughtful around my examples. I can kind of call out any key burning platforms or questions that you have. So now it's your turn to share some information with me. Tell me what's brought you along today. What are you hoping to get out of today's session? And I will stay quiet until I get some questions come through. Cool. Kara, kia ora Kara, thank you for joining us, says, I would like to understand the new functions of the MyHR performance review. Perfect, that demo at the end will be exactly what you're looking for, Kara. Anonymous, kia ora Anonymous, thank you for joining us, says how we can use MyHR's performance review feature to run quarterly performance development plans. Excellent, we'll be touching on the best way to set up plans, and again, that demo at the end will be very useful. Laurie, hi Laurie, thank you for joining us, says I'd love to learn how to leverage the platform for our performance reviews. Perfect. Thank you, Laurie. A couple more coming through and then we'll move on. Lynn, kia ora Lynn, thank you for coming along today. Says, how do we give negative feedback? Do we still do the praise sandwich? That's an excellent question. We'll talk about giving feedback a bit today. Marty, kia ora Marty, says, I have not used the MyHR system for performance reviews. All good. Simon says, implementing MyHR officially and want to get some key guidance and topics of performance reviews, as this is an area where we have been lacking. Nice one, Simon. I think you'll get a fair bit out of today's session. And then Amy, kia ora Amy, says, I'm coming back from parental leave into a new position as office manager, so looking to learn how the entire system works for all staff, which will be part of my new role. Awesome. Thank you, Amy, for coming along. Rachel, we've got Anonymous, we've got Ange, a couple more Anonymous. New users looking for tips to make the most of the system. Anonymous would like to know exactly what a performance review is and how to put one together. Ange says, keen to find out about people who refuse to meaningfully engage in performance reviews. Yep, that's not uncommon, Ange. Thank you for submitting that through. Looking for hints as to how to cope with people who are nervous to have performance reviews from Christine. Thank you, Christine. That's a very thoughtful comment. And then a couple other people looking to get value out of the system. Awesome. Well, thank you. That's a much higher proportion of comments that I usually get. So I love that. Thanks to the extroverts who have come along today and are ready to share their information. I think there'll be a little bit in here for everyone today. And I'm always open to having conversations afterwards if the session doesn't fully address your questions. So let's kick into it. And again, I'm more than happy to pick things up offline if we don't get to where you are hoping to get to today. But speaking of today, let's jump into what to expect. So the first thing we'll do is we'll talk about the drivers of performance at work. Performance reviews are here to do a bunch of things, and one of them is to improve and to support performance at work. So it's important to understand what we're talking about when we talk about performance. We'll talk about the purpose of performance reviews, including what they aren't, because one of the common mistakes that I see when managers are using performance reviews is they're using them as a tool in a place where that tool's not appropriate. So we'll certainly cover that off. We'll talk about understanding how your strategy needs to translate into team and then into individual goals to make sure your performance reviews are most useful. We'll talk a little bit about SMART goals as a methodology for making sure that the goals you're setting are useful and are meaningful to your team, because if they aren't useful and meaningful, to the comments earlier around people being reluctant to engage, it will feel like a waste of time and it will feel like a process that doesn't offer them anything. So we'll spend a bit of time there. For several of you, you wanted to understand how MyHR's platform supports meaningful performance reviews. Kapai will go into the demo towards the end and have a look at that. And lastly, what I'm hoping you will come away from this feeling is that you're ready to start doing or improving reviews with your team, whether you're doing them monthly or quarterly or yearly, because a improved performance review process is better for everyone, which is ourselves as well as our team, as well as our business. So those are the points that we're going to cover off today. So let's start by talking about what drives performance at work. So when we're thinking about people who are successful or people who are effective, what is it that makes them successful or effective? What should we be looking for when we're hiring people? But also, once we have people in the business and in the team, how do we support them to perform at their best? So it's an oldie but a goodie. The way that HR people and practitioners tend to think about performance is it's a function of your ability and your motivation and your opportunity. So ability is all of the skills or capabilities that a particular person has. So those might be your technical skills, whether, in my role, do I know how the Holidays Act works? Yes, no, I kind of have to know how that works. If I don't, I can't do my job. Your relationship and interpersonal skills, or the experience that you've brought, what your emotional intelligence is, how kind of clever or capable you are. If you don't have these foundational kind of requirements, regardless of how motivated you are and how many opportunities you're given to show those skills, if you don't have those skills, you won't be able to perform. So ability is the first thing we talk about when we talk about what drives performance at work. The second thing we talk about is motivation. So motivation can be a really fuzzy topic. There's been lots of money and lots of research put into understanding how certain people are or aren't motivated, as you can expect. And there's been a lot of competing theories and ideas around why people are motivated. The one that I find easiest to talk about is Deci and Graham's theory of motivation. Again, an oldie but a goodie. I think it's from the late 80s, early 90s, where the more connected someone feels, the more autonomous they feel, and the more competent they feel, the more motivated that they will be intrinsically to do a good job, to show up and do good work. But the other things that can play here are things like your personal drive, just how driven you are as a person, what your appetite for career growth is, your interest in development. So the importance of thinking around motivation is, if you have the most amazing Ferrari and it's got all of the abilities and the skills and it can go from 0 to 100 in 2.4 seconds, I don't know if that's a good acceleration rate for a Ferrari, I'm just assuming. But if you're never motivated to take it out of the garage, you may as well just have a 1996 Toyota Corolla. You can have all the abilities in the world. If you're not motivated to apply those abilities and skills to what's in front of you, you're not going to be performing. So ability and motivation both have to be there. And the last thing we talk about when it comes to performance is opportunity. So you can have the most amazing race car in the world and you're really motivated to take it out on the track and do good things with it. If you don't have a racetrack nearby, or if the racetrack you do have is covered in potholes, it's got tumbleweeds rolling across it, there isn't any crew there to support you as you're driving, then your race car is not going to perform at the level that it could. You've got the skills in the race car and you're motivated, you're keen to make a good go of it, but if you don't have the opportunity, you may as well not have either. And in a business context, to my experience, this is the one that most clearly gets ignored. We go looking for people who are very skilled and very capable and who are, raring to go and ready to hit the ground running. But opportunity in terms of clear objectives and expectations around what's expected of them, making sure that they have the right tools for the job, making sure that work is a supportive environment where people don't feel afraid to make a mistake or ask questions, having realistic expectations of someone and having a good sense of psychological safety at work. All of those things together form the opportunity that the skilled, motivated person has to perform at their best. And what's really I guess unique, or what's really powerful around performance reviews, is they're one of the few tools that we have in our business toolkit to touch on all of these three things. Good, effective performance reviews will support people's ability and support them to improve and get better at their job. Knowing as an employee that there is a clear development plan for you, that you know what your expectations are, your manager is having regular connecting conversations with you, you're given the autonomy and the space to do what's necessary, will affect the motivation piece. and setting clear expectations around what's expected of someone in a month or a quarter or a year, making sure that there are regular channels of communication where they can raise concerns or issues. We'll touch on the opportunity piece. So performance reviews can be incredibly powerful when done right, because we're tackling the ability side of performance, the motivation side of performance, and the opportunity side of performance. I think that was all I wanted to say on that slide. Anyway, it's super powerful. Ability, motivation, opportunity go hand in hand. So I've already obviously hinted at why we might want to do performance reviews, but really when they're done effectively, they can be incredibly powerful for individuals as well as for teams, as well as for your business or your organization, because what they are is a tool to align activity, to focus people's efforts, and to drive the results of whatever it is they're working on. Because what we can do with performance reviews is we use them to systemically break down business strategy into team and individual goals. Most businesses have a sense of what they want to achieve in the next 6 months or year or 2 years or 5 years, but at a high level, it's very difficult as, just a Jane blogs who's on the tools to know what's expected of me and how I can contribute to that strategy. So performance reviews break down the kind of long-term vision and direction into the tangible steps that we can take day to day to week to month to year to make that happen. Performance reviews also support really clear accountability. And by accountability, I mean what gets measured gets done. If you're not measuring something, it's hard to know if you're improving or getting worse or making progress. So when you have in a performance review a clear goal or objective or KPI, whatever language you like to use, for someone to improve revenue by 5% year on year, if they don't do that, there's a conversation around why it didn't happen. Why didn't you improve revenue? What activities did you take over the course of the year to get there? And even before we get to the point where we haven't hit that target, there are regular check-ins to make sure that we are on track. So all of those activities around checking in, setting expectations, having regular communication, having channels to raise concerns, is all part of building accountability so that we hit the targets that we're setting for our team, or if we're not, there's kind of clear communication action happening to make sure that we have the best chance of hitting those. Performance reviews also prompt regular check-ins and feedback between managers and direct reports. Any of us who've ever had a boss, I think most of us on the call will have had a boss at some point, if not right now, know that humans and therefore managers will have different preferences for the cadences they use to check in with their team. So if you have an extroverted manager who likes checking in with the team, is really good at taking everyone out for coffee once a month, make sure that they're available and they set whips and they have regular kind of contact points, that can be really helpful, kind of as long as it's not taken to extreme, of course. And sometimes you'll have managers who might be more introverted, or they might be more comfortable managing on the technical side of things and less on the people side of things. And perhaps they don't drive the creation and or ownership of check-in points and feedback between themselves and their direct reports. Maybe they expect their team to be the ones kind of raising issues if they have issues, or raising concerns that might need attention. Both approaches can work. What a performance review cycle does quite effectively is it agrees that, or at the beginning of it, you'll say, it's really important we check in on a monthly basis. So if I'm doing more than that, because that's my natural style of managing as a manager, that's perfectly fine. If I'm doing less than that, because that's my natural style, perhaps I want to be checking in a little bit more frequently just to make sure that I am catching up with my team and having those important conversations. So it removes a little bit of the variability around how often your employees are getting some attention, how often your employees are being held to account, equally importantly, depending on kind of the preferred management style of their manager. And the other reason we do them is that we're identifying skill gaps amongst our team based on what the business needs, and we can then target development based on that. So from a bottom-up perspective as an employee, most of us are pretty motivated to improve our skills and abilities, whether that's people in HR like myself wanting to improve our technical skills or our negotiation skills, whether it's a young salesperson who wants to improve her follow-up and her management of process, through to business leaders who want to improve their leadership and their management of vision and their ability to engage strategically. Most of us want to get better and improve over time. Now, if we combine that with the top-down vision of what the business wants, that's really where the magic happens. Because I could be really motivated to improve my research skills and be really committed to doing, a master's program to improve my academic side of things. But if that doesn't align with what the business wants from me, it wouldn't be a very good use of resource of money to pay for Sylvie to go and do a master's program when that's kind of not really related to her job. So from a top-down perspective as a business, we obviously want our team to be improving and getting better. It's a lot, arguably, it's more cost-effective to improve the skills of the people that you have in the business than be having to recruit and replace them all the time with different people. And so when we combine what the business needs with employees' appetite to improve, taking equal account of both of those drivers is quite important. And a performance review is really good at laying out what it is we're asking you to do, the skills and competencies that you need to have or to improve in order to achieve those outcomes. And here are the activities and support that we'll provide you to improve those skills to make sure you're getting done what needs to get done. And we'll work through a couple of examples of those later in the session if that seems a bit vague or a bit airy-fairy. Now, a couple of cautionary comments. Performance reviews are just a tool, and like any tool, they have limitations. So although I'm being very excited and very pro performance review and talking to you about all of this, they do have limitations. They're not a silver bullet to solve all of your problems. So they are not your only opportunity to give feedback or guidance or correction to your employees. If you have a performance review cycle and you're only giving your employees feedback every month when you check in or every quarter when you're having catch-ups, you are not doing a very good job as a manager taking advantage of every opportunity to support your employees to improve. The closer to the thing happening, which needed to go better or differently, you can manage to give feedback, the more effective that feedback will be most of the time. It's also not really fair to an employee who thinks everything's going swimmingly for a month or 3 months to then jump into a performance review and be hammered with all of the feedback that their manager has been writing down in a little, A5 notebook over the last 3 months, waiting to give them at the performance review. So make sure you are talking to your team and giving them feedback as you need to in the course of the day-to-day. There should be no surprises at a performance review. And if your employee is surprised by your feedback or if they're caught off guard, have a look at what your communication practices are leading up to that performance review check-in, because it's likely that you have missed an opportunity to communicate fairly and kindly and clearly with your employee about their progress and about how they're going. They're also sort of related, not a way to avoid having tough or challenging conversations. If you have set a bunch of expectations in your performance review and those expectations now are wildly out of whack because, I don't know, let's say hypothetically we have a global pandemic that completely changes the landscape and means that your sales targets for Q3 are not likely to be realistic. It's not okay to leave that conversation until the performance review and go, oh, well, I didn't hit my targets, but a pandemic happened, like, kind of say la vie, I'm going to write it off. And what needed to happen earlier is that there needed to be a discussion between the manager and the employee to say, circumstances have clearly fucking changed here, okay? We're in the middle of a pandemic. These objectives are no longer realistic. Let's change or manage those so that you still have something meaningful to aim for in your performance review. And that might mean going from, I used the example of 5% year-on-year growth earlier. Maybe that's 2%. Maybe it's just not losing any ground and not growing, but not shrinking either. But don't leave those conversations to the performance review. Likewise, if you have someone who's just sucks at their job and just really isn't putting the work in, or is a massive dickhead and needs to be pulled back into line, don't leave that alone and think, well, I know I've got a performance review coming up, so I'll address it with them then. That's not what a performance review is. If you have someone who is significantly underperforming or someone who's not behaving appropriately at work, those are separate issues, and performance reviews are not the tools to address those concerns with. They're also not a feel-good activity. So just like you shouldn't be leaving it until your performance review check-in to share challenging or negative feedback with your employees, you shouldn't be using them as a chance to just, gas them up and give them amazing feedback. If things have gone really well that year, fantastic. Let's celebrate that and let's acknowledge it and make sure you're giving your employee the credit that they've earned for all the hard work they've put in. But they also need to be, or It's a missed opportunity if all you use them for is a feel-good activity. There should be a healthy balance, and this will depend a little bit on which person or which business you're in. So to your comment earlier around how do you give negative feedback, we'll come to that a bit later. But there should be a reasonably healthy balance of here's what we did really well and here's what was successful. Here are the things that we can do better next quarter or next year. Here are the areas where I think you dropped the ball, and here are the things that I'm going to support you to improve. Again, if your year has been perfect and your employee has been a model of performance and output the whole way through, that's fantastic. And again, you want to acknowledge that, but they shouldn't just be an activity to blow smoke up the asses of the team that you work with. Make sure you're working in the constructive feedback as well. They also can't be a set and forget exercise. So performance reviews are most meaningful for employees when they are regularly being reminded that they exist and they're regularly being held to account. Any of us can write some amazing goals on a piece of paper and put it away in a drawer and not look at it for a whole year. So any of us can do that. That's not hard. Whatever we put in that drawer is basically out of sight, out of mind, and we're not going to be looking at it again. So it's really important that you're checking in with your team, reminding them of the objectives that they've set. If they need to be changed because circumstances have changed, again, that's fine. Just make sure that you're making those changes and communicating them. But the least effective way to do a performance review is to talk about it once, set goals, and then not look at it again for 6 months or 12 months. I guarantee you it's going to feel meaningless. You're not going to have people feel that it really matters. If you try and hold people accountable to it, kind of so what, like we haven't talked about it for 6 months. And that's at the point typically where you start to get people resisting performance reviews because they don't see the value. They're also not the be all and end all of performance and pay and employee connection. Now, we often get asked, how do pay discussions, performance discussions tie together? And my short answer is they are connected, but they are not the same. The reason for that is a performance review tracks how an employee has been delivering against set targets or goals or objectives. But a conversation around pay has to take account of a whole bunch of factors unrelated to that employee's deliverables or output. Your pay conversations need to take into account how well the business is doing. First off, if you've made a loss this year, it's unlikely you're gonna have a lot of cash to splash around. It needs to take account of kind of cost of living changes, if there's been significant changes in cost of living, which the last couple of years there have been. It needs to take into account how other teams and other employees have been delivering. You're looking ahead to your economic forecast for your business. You're making tactical choices around who in the business you want to try and retain as a key person or as key talent. So all of that must also include, has this particular employee been performing? Because if they haven't been performing, why would I want to give them more money potentially? But a conversation around performance and a conversation around pay are separate. They are connected but separate. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that today because that's kind of a bigger conversation. If you'd like to challenge me on that, or if you'd like to have a further discussion around how to manage conversations around pay and performance in your organization, please let me know. I'm happy to have a chat afterwards. But my immediate comment would be performance is a piece of the picture around pay, but it's not the only piece. Therefore, talking about performance needs to be separate to talking about pay because they take account of quite different factors. Cool. So let's come into, we're starting to think now around setting performance reviews and what the context is we're operating in. So your strategy or your business goals need to be clear and clearly understood in order to set meaningful performance reviews. And the reason I say that is your strategy or your business goals are about what are we trying to achieve over the next 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. And so sticking with the revenue example, let's say that over the next 1 year, you want to increase revenue by 5%. That's a good goal to have, because then you can look at your teams and go, well, I know that my service delivery team therefore needs to do such good work that we are retaining clients and we are not losing any ground. So I'm going to say that, let's say, churn equivalent to 1% of our revenue is acceptable. We always know we're going to have some clients who leave us. That might just be part of doing business, or it is part of doing business. And so I will say to my customer service team or my delivery team, churn of 1% is acceptable, but any more churn than that, and we're not doing a good enough job. So as a team, that's your goal. For my, excuse me, for my sales team, what that means is they have to achieve 6% of sales growth, right? Because we've got 100%, we know there's going to be 1% churn, therefore they need to replace the 1% churn and add on the extra 5%. So my goal for my sales team is going to be achieve sales growth or new revenue of 6% in a particular year. So those are you've now got your team goal of no more than 1% churn and 6% growth for your sales team. When we then come down to the individual level, Caroline, who's in our customer team, her targets are going to be things around regular follow-up with customers, around quality of delivery, around timeliness of response, around the friendliness of the customer service that she provides. And all of those behaviors, we believe, all of those targets are going to lead to a retention of 99% of customers and making sure that we're not losing more than 1% of our existing revenue. For my sales team, because I've got 6 BDMs, just for the ease of doing math, because math is hard on the fly, I'm going to say, well, each BDM has to be accountable for adding 1% of revenue every year. And so in this scenario, 1% of revenue is 200 grand. So each BDM over the course of a year has to deliver $200,000 worth of new revenue to make up that 6% target, which accounts for 1% churn and then the 5% growth on top. Now, if I didn't know that my business's goal or strategy was to increase my revenue by 5% year on year, it would then be really kind of messy to try and set team targets or individual targets. My BDMs might be going, well, last year I achieved 60 grand of revenue, and this year you're expecting me to achieve 200. That's massively unreasonable. Maybe I could stretch to 80. Or your customer service team might be going, well, actually, we don't really have any impact on revenue. So why are you telling us that we have to focus on churn all of a sudden? But knowing what the strategy is means you can break down what your teams are responsible for and then break down what each of those individuals are responsible for. Even if you don't have, a 20-page corporate strategy or you don't have a big strategy document, really push your leaders, or if you are a leader, really push yourself to set explicit goals and explicit outcomes that you want from the year or the 2 years or the 5, because once you have that explicit destination, your team leaders and your supervisors and your managers can start to kind of chart a pathway to get there, and that pathway to get there is what they will be managing their employees against. Now, when we're setting goals for our employees, and just to reiterate, whether you use the language of goals or objectives or targets, it's kind of whatever language is up to you. There are a few things that we want to keep in mind. What gets measured does get done, but if we're being really vague or unclear around what it is that we're asking from our employees, it's going to be really hard to hold them to account. And again, I've got a few examples I'll break down. So when you're setting a target or an objective, remember to keep it SMART. And SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So specific, be really particular around what it is that you're asking for. Measurable, make sure that you can track the goal. And if that's a quantitative outcome like 5% of revenue, that's pretty easy to track because you'll just look at your P&L and see if you've achieved that. But if it's a subjective outcome, have things like NPS scores or customer feedback or number of complaints or whatever your measure might be. Attainable, make sure you're setting goals that are challenging but are actually possible. If all of us are being asked to jump, over a bar that's this high and we can only get to a bar that's this high, that feels quite discouraging. So be connected to what your employees are capable of and what the context is in which they are trying to achieve those things, and make sure you're asking them to achieve things that are attainable. Next, be realistic. Drive to the conditions. If they change, reduce your speed. Applies here as much as it does to ads around safe driving. If things need to change because the environment is different or something has happened in your business which requires kind of attention to put out the fire and detracts from what you're asking your team to deliver for the year, be realistic, acknowledge that has happened, and set your targets accordingly or change your targets accordingly. And lastly, set deadlines. Saying achieve 5% of revenue is meaningless unless we say achieve 5% of revenue for this quarter or this year or this 2 years. If we don't have the time in which to achieve things, they'll just drag on. So make sure that there is a deadline, make sure that there is a particular point at which something will be measured as achieved or not achieved or partially achieved. Otherwise, things will just drag on forever. So when we talk about setting goals and performance reviews, as a general rule, you want to have between 3 to 6 in total. Any fewer than 3, and it's likely you've missed a couple of key outcomes for that employee most of the time, not always, but most of the time. And any more than 6, and it kind of becomes a bit hard to know what to pay attention to. We don't want to dilute the value of the goals that we're asking our team to focus on by having 20 in there. And the most common error I see is having far too many. So one of my managers at MyHR, who I work with, had said, I think, 22 goals for one of his team. And when we ran through and did a training on this internally, he was like, oh, okay, 24 is too many. I need to have it down a bit. I think he got it down to 10, which I think is still too many. But in the context of what he was asking this particular employee to do, I could see how he got to 10. So 3 to 6 as a general rule. A couple more is usually okay, but you don't want to split people's focus in too many directions. Otherwise, they won't ever be able to get to everything. It's just a bit beyond our capacity. So let's look at setting objectives and setting them as SMART goals. So on the left-hand column, I've got a series of objectives that I've seen that are quite vague. And on the right-hand side, we've got the SMART translation. So we'll start with the first one, be responsive to customers. For any of us who work in frontline, that's quite important. And be responsive to customers is a good thing. It's appropriate that we want our teams to behave that way. But it's vague, it's not time-bound, there aren't any specific measurables. Is it attainable? I don't know, because I don't know what I'm asking of them. So the way that I would reformulate that into a SMART goal is to say, all customer emails have a response within 1 business day and are either escalated or resolved within 3 business days. Now, that's specific. It's measurable. I think it's attainable. I don't think that's unrealistic. And it'll be time bound because I'm going to put this in a performance review that lasts for 3 months. So it needs to be happening within a 3-month period. And I've also said all customer emails. So I'm not giving this person any wiggle room to have a customer email which got left for 5 days and not responded to. I'm saying that this goal around responsiveness to customers has to be consistent for every single interaction that customers have with us. The other objective, or the second one there, is be nice to customers. Again, I think that's pretty good if you're being quick off the mark with the response to customers, but you're calling them munters all the time, not super effective. So I'm saying that being nice to customers is a key objective for a person in a receptionist role or in a customer service role. But again, it's pretty vague, it's not measurable, it's not specific. So the way that I've reworded that is to say, there are no justified complaints received from customers for the period of this performance review. Now, this person can't control the behavior of customers, right? So I'm not going to say no complaints are received from customers. Some people will never be happy, and some people shouldn't be allowed out of the house because they are very difficult to deal with and have things they need to manage. But what I'm saying is that there are no justified complaints. So if we get a complaint in from someone and it's clear that they're just being an asshole, they were just having a bad day, but this person did everything appropriate and didn't antagonize or trigger the complaint, that's fine. I'm not going to count that. But if a complaint comes in that is justified, then they wouldn't have achieved this objective at the end of their performance review. Another example, do good work and do it on time. Again, important for all of us, but not specific. It's not measurable, and it's not, I don't know if that's realistic. So what I'm saying is that my SMART version of that on the right-hand side is that more than 90% of our deliverables are met as committed to the client in the sales proposal. So I'm allowing a bit of wiggle room for 10% of deliverables not to be met, because for anyone who's ever managed a project, it's very difficult to get everything done and on time. But I'm saying more than 90% of them must be met as committed to the client, which is where some of this detail will live outside of this performance review. Lastly, I've used this example as we've been going through, so hopefully not too alarming here. But if I'm saying grow sales and revenue every year, a specific measurable way to communicate that would be to say revenue increased by 10% for the financial year 2022-2023 compared to the previous financial year. It's specific, it's measurable, it's particularly asking for what I want, and it's much more likely to be achieved than just saying to someone grow sales and revenue every year. Now, one of the things that came up when I asked you why you were attending today was around dealing with difficult people. Totally fair. Difficult people exist everywhere. It's what's that quote? Hell is other people. So we all have to deal with difficult humans in our business and sometimes in our team. Now, One of the reasons that I'm encouraging you to be smart and specific around your objectives is if you have someone who is difficult or sometimes just a bit clueless, if you say to them, grow sales and revenue every year, and they only achieve 1% of growth in that time, when in your mind you had 10%, they have done what you've asked of them. They have grown sales and revenue, and they can point to, without being dishonest or manipulative in any way, and say, "Well, I grew it by 1%, so therefore I get this objective ticked." And you're going, "Jesus, 1% doesn't even cover your salary, dude. Like that's not the same thing." So being specific and explicit around what it is you're asking for means that when it comes time to assess success or assess progress on a performance review, it's really clear what you have asked for. And if the employee, whether by being oblivious or by being deliberately a difficult person, has far less room to wiggle out of it and kind of argue their case because you've been really clear around what it is that you're asking for from them. So jumping into then the next section here, which is around setting competencies and skills. So this is where we start to get into the personal or professional development aspect of performance reviews. So I flagged this earlier, they're not just about achieving performance, they're about achieving employee buy-in and around improving people's capability. So your competencies or your skills are the skills or abilities that a person needs in order to achieve the objectives set asked of them. So you want to have between 3 and 4. Again, any fewer than 3, there's likely to be a skill that you're missing identifying as being important. Any more than 4, it's likely that you're kind of being a bit scattergun and not focusing this person. And these skills and competencies might be different. So someone who's an introvert might need to work on different skills, let's say uh, comfort with strangers, or working on their kind of social skills in order to achieve their revenue goal. Someone who's really extroverted and really get-go might need to work on their follow-through or on their kind of administration and record keeping in order to achieve the objectives being set of them. So don't get a fright if you have multiple people with similar objectives, but they've got different skills and competencies. That's perfectly normal because it's likely they will each need to be focusing on different skills in order to get there. So as an example, if we take a couple of those SMART goals from earlier, here on the right-hand side is one competency that is likely to support what it is that they need to achieve. So the goal of having customer emails with a response within 1 business day and being escalated or resolved, someone who is in my customer service team might need to improve their customer focus. If they have a hard time understanding why I'm asking for this responsiveness, improving their focus on customers and what the experience of the customer is going to help them achieve that goal, because they'll have a meaningful understanding of and connection to what I'm asking because they understand how it impacts the customer's experience. Down the bottom, when we're looking at the 90% of deliverables are met goal, the competencies piece there might be around delivering results, so holding themselves and others accountable and taking ownership to make effective and timely decisions. This is often a competency that I use when I've got someone who's either quite fresh in their career and isn't used to having to make shit happen, basically, for want of a better term, or for someone who perhaps tends to let others take the lead, hasn't yet shown a whole lot of initiative, maybe waits to be told what to do, and maybe that's not going to be an effective strategy for them in their role or with what they're being asked to deliver. So the delivering results competency is really around going, okay, having a clear line of sight to what it is that you're trying to do, and then clearing the road to getting there and making sure that we make it happen. Now, we're running a little bit over time, so I might skip through this next piece here just really quickly, and then we'll get into the demo. But what we need to remember is that if we're asking our employees to improve their skills, we need to make sure that we are giving them development opportunities and development support to improve those skills. Coaching with someone in the business who has that skill already is a really helpful way to make progress. Formal training courses can be useful, but should only be about 10% of the development that someone everyone has. You roughly want to have 70% development coming on the job, like doing the thing you're asking them to improve, 20% from social learning, so coaching or watching others, and about 10% from formal activities. And with delivering results, again, one example might be coaching with a member of the business, or it might be a project management course to help them map out the process or the steps they need to take to get to the result that they're being asked to deliver. So I'll leave this for you to review if you like to come back, but when you're preparing for performance reviews as a manager and as an employee, there's a few things that will make your life a bit easier. Basically, just taking the time to think around what it is you're asking or what you're thinking about, what you're trying to get out of the session. And as an employee, making sure that you're coming to the session prepped and looking for prepped and coming with ideas so that you're looking for particular development opportunities that suit what it is that you're looking for from your career. So unsurprisingly, I've flagged up a demo a couple of times now. Computers are smart, so we want to try and let them do some heavy lifting when it comes to performance reviews. They can help us with being consistent in our process and our approach. We can use them to set alerts and reminders, so we're keeping ourselves accountable for making stuff happen. We can use them to track progress. In the MyHR platform, of course, having collaborative feedback and assessments is really useful. And we have a refreshed performance review feature that takes advantage of all of those things. So I'll take a second just to stop sharing and jump into the account that I'm going to demo with you. But if any of what I've said just then has tickled any questions, or there's anything that you'd like me to talk about in more detail once we've done the demo section of this, now might be a moment for you to reflect and pop them through as I just get us sorted for this demo. Cool. I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me. All right, let's jump into it. So here you can see the MyHR Launchpad. Now the MyHR, excuse me. For those of you who do have a MyHR account, this will be very familiar. For those of you who don't use our platform at the moment, the Launchpad is the first page that you land on. You've got your key kind of areas or features of the account up above. You've got some key actions on the left-hand side. We'll put in pop-ups as we need to let you know about any changes to employment law, about to let you know that we're going to be closed for our Christmas party on Thursday, which is what this one does. And down the bottom is the start of MyHR's reporting feature, just giving you a quick overview of your employee breakdown. So what we're going to do is set up a performance review for one of our team. So I'm going to go to My People in this tab at the top here. And I'm going to go to Billy Beans, who is my sales manager. He looks after the sales for my coffee roastery business. So I've clicked on Billy Beans. I've obviously got all of his overview details here on the left-hand side. But what I'm really paying attention to today is this performance tab here on the right-hand side. So I'm going to click into that. So Billy doesn't have a performance review in place. Let's set one up. We're going to click on this active reviews piece on the left. And then we're either going to create a new template for Billy, or we're going to choose from our existing ones. I'm just going to choose general performance review because I'm going to be tailoring it quite a bit. But if you'd like to use templates that we've created, you're welcome to. If it's helpful to use an AI generated template, you're welcome to. The AI generated one will ask you to put in the job description for the person that you're looking for. And then once you hit save, it will auto-populate a performance review for you. It's a really sexy feature that I would like to go into more detail with you on today. But just in terms of cementing the learnings we've been talking about, I will just be building one from scratch. But if you need some help getting started, this AI generated feature can be really helpful. So create a review for Billy. I'm going to use a general performance review template. I'm going to set the cycle to be the first quarter of next year. So 1 January through to 31 March. Oh, and you can set these time frames for as long as you need or as short as you need. In terms of how long of a cycle is useful, if you have a role or a team where they have pretty quick turnover work. So their work's quite transactional, it happens quite quickly. That might be retail or in a call center environment, perhaps manufacturing. You might have a performance review cycle of a month or 2 months because that's quick enough to kind of see that they're achieving what's being asked of them and that they're improving. But where you have workers or employees whose work is a bit more complicated and has slightly longer kind of cycles. So sales managers or leadership or project managers or engineers, typically you'll be having 3 or 6 or 12-month review cycles. And yeah, it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question. So if you've got a specific situation you'd like me to comment on in terms of length of time, pop it in the questions and I'll pick it up once we're done. Cool. So that has created my template here for Billy Beans. So up the top, I can see that we're currently in draft. This is a draft review. The cycle is from 1st of Jan to 31st of March. Yep, that's all good. Currently, Billy can't edit this draft review. If I wanted his input on this, I could change that so that he could come in and add his 2 cents as to what he thinks his targets would be. And when I'm ready, I can publish the review, save it as a template. I can also add reminders to my calendar, depending on whether I use Google or Outlook or Apple or iCal. And then that will set those prompts for me to check in and have those conversations with Billy. So scrolling down, I can see that I've got a couple of sections here already. So my key performance indicators, I'm going to change to be goals because I like that language better. And development plan, I'm going to rename personal development plan because I like that language better. So all of that's obviously customizable depending on the person and on the business. So in terms of goals, I'm going to add an item. And I'm going to add from the MyHR examples that we already have built into the database. And because Billy is my sales manager, I'm going to type in sales and see what comes up. And achieve X% sales growth for this period compared to previous period. Yeah, I think that's the one that I'm going to add here. Oh, I'm going to change that to 2% because it's only for a quarter. For this quarter compared to the previous quarter. I want to have a rating scale, and I don't need to add a due date because I've already got it there in the length of the cycle itself. Cool. Now, Billy's a sales manager. He's building up my sales team, so I'm going to add one more objective for him here. And my objective is going to be successfully recruit and hire 2 new biz development executives. Oh, excuse me. And I'm going to have a progress tracker, and the due date for that is going to be different. I need him to hire these people and have them on board sooner than March. So the deadline for that is actually going to be the end of February. Oh, easy. Now the skills that Billy needs, I'm going to add one here. And I need Billy to focus on his results delivery, or his delivering results piece here. And Billy is very much a effective introvert who's very good at process, but he's not super good at the leadership kind of personal side of things. So the other skill that I'm going to add here is I want to add something around leadership or around working with people, or what am I looking for here? Let's go building effective teams. It's the first time he's been asked to hire and manage people. So I'm going to add this building effective teams piece into here. Cool. And then I come down to the personal development plan. I'm going to add an item here around complete senior sales seminar. Sylvie to book, Billy to attend. And I'm going to have a progress tracker because that's either it did happen or it didn't happen. When we come down to our values and culture, Billy's been with us a long time. He's pretty well versed in our company values and culture. So I'm actually just going to delete this section. There's nothing in there that I would want Billy to focus on. And I'm going to keep these questions here. What went well? What didn't go well? What could we do better? And what are the overall comments? Now, Billy, again, has been with us a long, long time. He's a very trusted member of staff. So I'm going to change the setting so that he can edit this review and put his 2 cents in. Now it's still in draft, and I can either save it as a draft by just exiting from the screen, or I can publish it and make it live. And in this case, I'm going to publish it to show you what happens next. So we've clicked publish. And now this is our performance review that is live. It's in cycle. You can see the status here has changed. So a couple of features to show you very quickly before we get to questions, because I said I would let you go by 2 and I've overshot a little bit. So these goals here I can add comments to. So myself and Billy can both say tracking well, outbound calls are already up 25% on previous quarter. Indications are all on track so far. And I'm going to add that comment. So the comment section is a really useful way just to track progress on a particular goal. Your employee can add comments as well if you let them, so that you've got their side of the picture kind of as you go. And again, like I talked about earlier, it's really difficult to run an effective performance review whenever there are surprises. So again, just that tracking and being really explicit about how things are going means that we are much more likely to have an effective performance review system, and also for the employee to feel engaged and not caught off guard if I need to give them some challenging feedback. So, demo complete. Thank you very much for your patience. I will stop sharing so you can see my face in all its glory full on your screen as we go into our Q&A function. So thank you for attending and watching through those sections. We've got 5 minutes before we hit 2 o'clock, and I will run through and answer some of the questions that have come through. Please put your question in if you do have one, and if it doesn't get left or I can't get to it, I will drop you a message afterwards if you haven't been anonymous. But I will also stay. Let me just double check what my calendar is. I will also stay for 10 minutes past 2 o'clock answering questions, so that at least they're captured on the recording of the session today. And if you can stay for a couple of minutes afterwards, you're welcome to as I make my way through questions. So let's jump in. Lynn, your question from earlier around how to give negative feedback. Do we still do the praise sandwich? That's an excellent question. So I wouldn't recommend doing the praise sandwich, because if you're someone who is inclined to only hear the positive, you will hear the compliment at the beginning and the compliment at the end, and you won't pay attention to the negative thing. And if you're someone who struggles with feedback or hearing negative feedback, you will ignore the positive things and freak out only about the negative one. So when I recommend giving feedback, and when I do this with my colleagues and my team, the way that I talk about it is being really clear on what you're asking for and focusing on the behavior, not the person. The person is not the problem, it's the behavior or the action that's the issue. So start out by saying what has happened. So this might be, hey Sylvie, I know that you send around the agenda for the monthly sales and marketing meeting. When you send this around with only a day or 2 to go before the meeting, it doesn't give us time to kind of prep and understand what's been happening. So next time, could you please send it out at least a week before? This would give us enough time to pay attention to the details and the nuance, and to come well prepared with any questions. So you want to talk about what has happened, and crucially what the consequences of the thing is. Sending out the agenda only a day before doesn't give us enough time to review it. Ask for what you'd like to be different, sending it out a week in advance. Explain why that's what you're asking for, so that people have more time to prep. And then at the end saying, do you have any concerns with that approach? Do you think that would be effective? Please let me know if there's a way you can think it can be done differently. So you don't need to pad it out with compliments. You just need to be explicit about explaining why what's happening currently isn't working, what it is you're asking for to be different, explaining why what you're asking for to be different you expect to make it to be effective, and then at the end checking in to see if the employee has any comments or feedback. Rachel had asked, how do we take the performance review discussion into an individual's action or work plan? Rachel, I might get you to give me a bit more detail there in terms of an action or a work plan. If you could talk to me a little bit more around what you would use a work plan for, an action plan, and then I can explain how the performance review piece fits into that. But at the moment, I'm not quite sure what that might be referring to. Anonymous has said, I'm conducting some performance reviews at the moment. How do I do so in a business that pivots a lot with goals changing often, etc.? Great question. That can be a really difficult environment to manage performance expectations and because of the frequency of change. So my recommendation would be either to run quite short performance review cycles, say a month or 2 months, and that way you're only ever assuming things will be the same for 4 weeks or 8 weeks, and maybe your rate of change isn't that quick, maybe it's a bit longer. But what you want to make sure is that your employees still have direction. And actually, that's more important in a business where things are changing often because it can be very disorientating trying to figure out which way we're heading. So make sure you still are giving your employees direction. Keep your cycle shorter if you need to, if that's all the certainty that you have in the business. But if you do get caught off guard partway through a review cycle, totally cool. Acknowledge and credit your team for what they have done so far, like give credit for what they have been working on, and then just reorientate what it is that they're working on for the next month or quarter or 6 months, and changing as you go. So nothing, I mean, you have my sympathy for working in an environment that changes so often, but just making sure that your employees are still getting the benefit of direction and are just having their performance reviews adjusted sensibly as you go would be the way to manage that. Andrew's question from earlier was around finding out about people who refuse to meaningfully engage in performance reviews and how to address this first informally and then in a more formal setting. I would start by having a conversation with them if you haven't already to say, I'm observing, and start with what you're seeing, right? So it's all about what you are observing and not about attributing or assuming things about their motivation or their behavior. So Sylvie, what I'm seeing is that you don't appear to be that excited about this performance review process. Whenever we have meetings about it, I see your arms folded and, I see you give eye rolls sometimes. And whenever I ask you questions about your performance and how you're tracking, I get kind of one syllable answers and you don't appear very engaged. I think this is a process that has a lot of benefit for you and for the business. So what's going on with you? Why are you not so excited about it, or why are you not keen? And just have a discussion to see what their perspective is. And then once you've got a handle or understanding on that, maybe you can do something about it. If they feel like they're being asked to deliver unreasonable targets, great. Can you make their targets more reasonable? If they feel like they have been promised lots of development in the past and it's never happened, so why should they trust you this time? They've never been sent on that sales course they wanted to go on. Can you book the sales course now and show them that you do mean it? However, if they're just someone who is kind of not into it and just a bit grumpy or a bit surly and not really willing to go along with the process, you may need to have, as you've identified, a formal discussion with them to say, participation in this process isn't voluntary. You need to be going through this. I've worked with you to try and make it as easy for you to engage with as possible, but not participating isn't an option. So what can we do to make this feel more comfortable for you or more meaningful for you? Because the other options is I force you to go through this with me, and we both have a shit time because you don't want to be here and I don't want to be taking you through it. So what can we do to make it more meaningful and to engage you in that process? Cool. I'm just ticking off the ones that we've spoken to already. Christine had a comment here around looking for hints as to how to cope with people who are nervous to have performance reviews. Christine, I think that's a really thoughtful comment or question, so thank you for bringing it up. Again, I would start with a conversation to understand where that nervousness is coming from. If they have been badly treated by a manager previously, or maybe they have some anxiety around being evaluated or being assessed. I mean, none of us really like public speaking. None of us really like being rated. So I think that anxiety is understandable. It would be to have a conversation and just see where it's coming from. And then if there are accommodations that you can make, then potentially that's something you can talk to them about. So, Sylvie, I understand that you're really nervous about being rated on a 1 to 10 scale. Would it help if we changed your rating scale to below target, a little bit below target, on target, a little bit above and above target? Would changing it from numbers to language just make you feel more at ease? Might be an example of something straightforward you can do. Beyond that, if they have a anxiety or a discomfort that maybe more stems from who they are and less about how the process is being run, you might want to offer them to have a support person. So you might say, look, I totally appreciate that this can be really uncomfortable for you. My commitment to you is that there will never be any surprises in a performance review. You will always be able to see my comment history. I will always listen to your feedback and what you have to say. But I understand this is still pretty nerve-wracking. Is there a support person you'd like to bring along? A partner, a parent, a friend? colleagues usually not appropriate, but someone in your life who you would trust to come to this meeting to kind of be there for you would be an example of an accommodation you can make. Alternatively, I've worked with employees who only ever wanted to talk about performance reviews in person. They found like emails and comments in writing just too confronting. And then also people who only ever wanted to do it in writing because they found in-person conversations too confronting. So there might be ways that you can set up the way that you engage with them to make it a bit more comfortable for them, offer them a support person, try and understand where their anxiety or nervousness is coming from. And I guarantee you that if you do a couple of those things, you'll get someone who is much more comfortable engaging in the process, and therefore the quality of the process and the quality of the discussions that you have will be much improved. Cool. Will, kia ora Will, thank you for joining us today. Says, should we log all our one-on-ones within the platform? I'm obviously the evangelist for MyHR. My response would be yes. Broadly speaking, it is quite useful to have a timeline of your conversations with someone. As an example, I had a performance review check-in for myself because we eat our own dog food. We use MyHR with my manager the other day, and we had both been making comments as we went through the month. We're coming into Christmas, so we're both pretty shattered, to be honest. It's been a long year. And so the only comment that he made in the notes function was performance review check-in happened on the 6th or the 7th, whenever it was. Kind of no concerns, like all track. Like he didn't even add any filler. It was just, we had the conversation, all good, like kind of comments tracked against the objectives. So where you can show that you're having those conversations and tracking them, I would recommend you do so. If there is a concern that you're trying to manage, having that record of what it is that you're trying to manage and the feedback you've given and the support that you've tried to provide does a few things. One, it reassures you that you're not going crazy and being petty, that you continually to be frustrated by Sylvie's poor quality of handover notes, whatever the issue is. But also, if you ever then need to escalate it out of a performance review piece into a performance improvement plan or into a disciplinary process, you've got all the notes and all the timestamps there. And when you're ready to call the MyHR team and go, I'm just fed up with Sylvie and her poor quality of handover notes, I'd like to run a disciplinary. Can you take a look at all of these records and tell me if I've got grounds to? We can really quickly jump in and see what's been happening. So broadly speaking, yes, keeping records is really useful. If there's nothing kind of meaningful in there that you need to be explicit about, just saying that your one-on-one check-in happened is a good idea. But if there is a concern that you're managing, document it so you've got the paper trail, and then when you're ready to escalate, or if you need to escalate, it's all been done for you. Will also asks, we are a tech sales organization. Can we have sales figures as goals? Can they be used to drive performance? And in case of low achievers, potentially used for dismissal? Yep, the long answer to that question, or the short answer is, you can absolutely have sales targets in your performance review. And the examples that I used in that demo had sales targets in there. I used a percentage, but you can have dollar value. So make $150,000 of sales, totally fine. And the short answer is yes. If you have someone who is repeatedly missing targets, you can dismiss them for poor performance. That is a longer process than a performance review is used to manage. You would need to issue them with a performance improvement plan, clearly explicating what happened if it didn't go well. At the end of the PIP, if they didn't meet their targets, it's a disciplinary for a formal warning, another PIP disciplinary for final warning, another PIP and dismissal. So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is please get some professional advice, because there's a bit more involved if you're firing someone for underperformance and just giving them a poor rating on their performance review. But yes, you can do it. And we manage about 35 to 40 disciplinaries a week at the moment, and about 10 of those are for dismissal. And certainly failing to hit sales targets is something we see pretty commonly. So certainly something we can help with if we need to. Wendy asks, what does BDM stand for? Thank you, Wendy. BDM stands for, in my usage, Business Development Manager. So someone who's in a sales role and has accountability either for hunting out new business and self-generating leads, or managing leads that have been brought into them from a marketing team, but is expected to close sales and likely has sales targets as part of their performance review. I should have clarified earlier. Thank you for clarifying that on behalf of everyone else. Should SMART goals be more objective? Asks Anonymous. Is subjective wording okay in a SMART goal, for example, justified? Totally. So SMART goals don't have to be quantitative. Quantitative means using numbers or measurements or frequency to manage success. So a quantitative SMART goal would be achieve X% of revenue increase. As you've identified, a subjective goal would be no justified complaints in a particular period of time. Now, qualitative or subjective language can't be avoided. Sometimes I do just want someone to have no justified complaints, and there isn't really it would be really hard to put a number to that. So you can totally have subjective goals. Just be specific about how you would be measuring success for a subjective goal. It's harder than quantitative goals because did you or did you not achieve 5% revenue growth? Yes, no, that's a really black and white outcome. What justified is in terms of a complaint obviously is a bit more open to negotiation, but just because they're harder to measure and talk about doesn't mean they're less important. Sometimes they can be critically important. All you need to do is be specific around how success is being measured, and if you need to, be prepared to justify the way that you have assessed that goal and talk through your thinking. Remember, your employee doesn't have to agree with your rating. You just have to be able to reasonably justify it. So if you're concerned around employee pushback, that's a fair concern. Sometimes it does happen, but you don't have to get your employee to agree. You just have to be able to reasonably explain and be accountable for. Wendy asks, what were those percentages that I gave for development? Oh, sure. So generally, we think of development as formal courses, right? So going to webinars, going to trainings, getting coaching, all that kind of stuff. But we know from many years of research in education and in business and in social sciences that people learn best when doing. It's very easy to explain to someone technically how ice skating works, but until you strap on a pair of skates and you try ice skating, you're not going to learn how to do it. So broadly speaking, you want to have 70% of someone's development happening on the job. So doing stretch tasks, stretch activities, doing work that's a bit beyond their capability level to help them improve that skill or that competency. 20% you want to come from social learning. So watching someone else do it, receiving coaching, talking about it with someone, maybe seeing how they might do things differently. And 10% to come from formal environments. So that means, reading Accountancy for Dummies or going to courses, going to seminars, doing tests and any of that kind of stuff. So 70% on the job, 20% social learning, 10% in a formal learning environment. Anonymous asks, my performance review tab does not look like this. Do we need to click something to move to the new performance review feature? Yes, you do. So if you were an existing MyHR client before, I'm going to get the dates wrong, I think about the 4th of December, you'll be in the old model. If you, at the top of your MyHR account, click on My Business and then click on Reviews, I think is the next tab. There should be a banner there that says, do you want to move to the new performance review feature? You want to click yes, and then that will take you to the new feature. Any issues, just email help@myhr.works or give us a call. Our customer success team is working through migrations with existing customers at the moment. So if you need some support from us, just get in touch. We're happy to help. Deborah has said, I had to leave the webinar halfway through, was wondering if it will be sent out to participants. Totally. There'll be a recording of this available, again, I think by the end of the week, but you'll receive an email with a link to the recording so you can access it later, so no stress. Anonymous asks, for Billy, I stated what his goal was. That goal will have actions that may have due dates in themselves. How do you suggest that these are best captured? Great question. So when you're setting a goal, you can either set an outcome or you can set a goal that relates to an outcome, or you can set a goal that relates to a behavior. So we call them lag and lead indicators. So for Billy, I've said that outcome is I want you to hire 2 new business development people by the end of February. The actions that have to happen are get a job ad up, interview those candidates, choose which one you like, do reference checking, bring them up. So there's obviously a bunch of stuff that has to happen. Now, if Billy was a junior person, I would be setting his objectives as the activities that needed to happen to achieve the outcome I wanted. Because he's a senior person, I trust him to just go, Billy, I want 2 people hired and onboarded by the end of February, and I trust that he's going to figure out what needs to happen to get to my outcome. So for people who are newer in their careers or for people who are newer in their role, setting lead indicators is useful. make 200 outbound calls a week because I know that will deliver the sales results I want. I don't know, update the SOP documents and make changes by this, like setting the behavior that you want to see can be really useful for juniors. However, for senior people, it's frustrating. It feels like micromanagement. Like, I know how to do my job, so just tell me what I need to achieve rather than telling me what to do. So when you have senior people, tell them what to achieve. When you have junior people, tell them what to do, and that will be more effective in terms of clearly communicating to them what your expectations are of them. Quick question from Anonymous. I see that you are tailoring the review to the team member. If you have a team all with the same key functions, is it okay to do this? It depends a bit on, so if you've got a team who all have the same functions, you can do two things. You can have performance reviews for each of them that look identical, because all of your call center employees might have to answer calls within 30 seconds of the caller ringing or whatever. Maybe that's a target that's the same for all 20 of your contact center staff. But what's more common, even in teams when the jobs are the same or the functions are the same, is you have people who are a bit more capable and people who are a bit less capable. So again, if we're being thinking about SMART goals, so we're being attainable and realistic, what I'm asking of from a senior person is likely to be quite different as to what I'm asking for from a junior person. So although their job and their function is the same, I'm going to set the bar a bit higher for the senior person. I'm probably going to set the bar a bit lower for the junior person and include more here's what to do goals, whereas for the senior person, I'll probably have more here's what to achieve goals. So perfectly fine to have them all be exactly the same if that's appropriate, perfectly fine to have some variation if that's the best way to account for who you have in your team and what you're asking of them. It just depends what's appropriate for the people themselves and what's going to be achievable and realistic for those people to be looking for. Anonymous asks, do I believe weekly performance reviews are necessary, for example, in a sales environment? Could it be argued that 1 week is simply not long enough to showcase results and to work on sales that are within the pipeline? Totally. A week is far too short for most roles. I can't think of maybe a contact center role. Even then, a week is not a long time. So the way that I would manage it is to have for sales roles, usually quarterly is fine, not always, but usually. And if I needed to, I'd be having 2 weekly check-ins to see how things are going. And that's not about have you achieved $8,242 of revenue for this fortnight, because that leads to your $90,000 target over a fortnight, or however the math works out. But it's just a check-in to make sure things are going well. Having a full-blown performance review where the employee rates how they have gone and the manager rates how they have gone is not efficient. It's far too much admin for a week's turnaround. It'll feel like micromanagement. And as you've identified, it doesn't give you enough time to do the work or to improve the skills to get the better results. So I would argue against a week for most contexts. I would instead say more regular check-ins to see how things are going, but still have targets be over your 8 weeks or your 12 weeks or your 6 months, depending on what the role is. Julia, kia ora Julia, thanks for joining us, asks, is it possible to have monthly or bi-monthly check-ins on your employees that link to annual performance goals, as in a linked form so you can see progression towards goals, or is this information captured in notes? Totally recommend having regular check-ins. Monthly or bi-monthly is pretty common, so I wouldn't have any concerns with that. What I would suggest you do is that at each of those check-ins, using that comment field I showed you on the right-hand side to add a couple of comments or to add mark progress would be the best way to do it. And if you wanted to just have a quick summary piece, to put that in the employee smart notes to say, we've had a check-in, it's all looking good, no concerns. But best to track it against each of the goals so that when it comes to rating the employee or doing the appraisal towards the end of the process, then you've got that record there. Oh, quite a few questions to go and we're at 2:17. So what I will do is I'll take a photo of these and put them in an email to send out to you with my comments. I'm sorry we've run over time, but I really appreciate all the questions that you've had. It's quite encouraging when it's not just me talking to what can feel like an empty room sometimes. So I'll let you all go. Thank you so much for coming along this afternoon. I hope this has been a useful, interesting session. I hope that you feel more prepared to engage and have meaningful performance review conversations with your employees. If you'd like to get in touch, we're at 0800 694769. You can also email me directly if you have questions. I'm at Sylvie at myhr.works, Sylvie help@myhr.works. You can also get in touch, help@myhr.works. Recording will come out and be available. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your afternoon, and Merry Kirihimiti, or Merry Christmas, or Happy Holidays to those of you who celebrate and recognise the end of year. But otherwise, last webinar from us for the year. Have a wonderful, wonderful break, and I look forward to seeing you all refreshed and revitalised in 2024 to kick off from there. So ka kite, take care, and I'll see you all again soon.